And speaking of China, finally tonight, China gets ready to take over Hong Kong this summer, and part of that preparation is taking another look at a bitter episode in Chinese history. Ian Williams of Independent Television News reports.
The Pearl River, today one of China's most important commercial gateways. Yet it was only in the 18th century that Britain established its first trading post here, opening up the vast Chinese market to trade. Many Western writers portray that as a romantic, adventurous era, the merchants who sailed these waters as rather swashbuckling figures. But that's not the way China sees it. Opium was the only trade that mattered, and in a Guangzhou film studio, the consequences of that trade are played out as part of a television series. By the 1830s, there were thousands of opium dens in Canton, and in parts of China, opium addiction had reached epidemic proportions, most smuggled in vast quantities by British traders from British India. Actors portraying addicts are in big demand. In addition to this series, a major movie and several documentaries are being made, to be broadcast around the time of the handover of Hong Kong. In the view of Chinese historians, the handover itself shouldn't overshadow the history, the seizure of Hong Kong after a war waged by Britain in defense of the opium trade.
Opium is a poison. The British used it as a weapon to open the door of China. Don't you think that's the most dirty and shameless thing? Even the British author Montgomery called it more dirty and shameless than slave trading.
Foreign merchants first came to Canton to service a British addiction, an addiction to tea. By the early 19th century, demand was insatiable, and the duty on tea imports to Britain accounted for 10% of British national revenue. All the tea came from China, by way of Canton, as tea cultivation in India only began in 1832. That meant the balance of trade was heavily in China's favour, until, that is, opium was brought in to pay for it. The British traders were only allowed to operate on Shamian Island in Canton. Today there's still ample evidence of the early European settlements, from where the traders saw little wrong with ignoring Chinese laws outlawing the opium trade, nor did the local Chinese officials who helped them. Then came the arrival in 1839 of Lin Jie-shu, sent by the emperor to stamp it all out. Lin, regarded as a national hero, ordered the surrender of all opium. More than 1,000 tons, possibly the biggest drugs haul in history, were burnt on the banks of the Pearl River. Lin banished the traders and the Chinese middlemen from Canton, events soon followed by armed intervention from Britain. The two sides first came to blows at these forts, which guard the Pearl River a short distance from Canton. It was the first armed clash between China and the West, and it was all over in a day. The battle here was short and decisive. An armada of ships from the Royal Navy bombarded these walls, soon breaking the Chinese defences. Canton was then at the mercy of British guns, and within 3 weeks, Britain seized Hong Kong, an event scholars here regard as a turning point in the modern history of China. In a museum dedicated to the Opium Wars, visitors are told how it was simply aggression in pursuit of an evil trade. There's no room here for those Western interpretations that see it as much about the principle of free trade as opium.
A few of them will say, oh, it's not aggression. it's only a war of trade. So, of course, we don't agree with that opinions. So I explained to her, I showed the fact after they visited our exhibition, after they listening to my explanation, they will know, they will be convinced by the history.
Here too, portraits of the British traders Jardine and Matheson. The company they founded is still the largest employer in Hong Kong. Outside, visitors unleash their own cannonballs at the British fleet, scoring a far higher hit rate than was managed by their 19th century ancestors. In the Chinese television series, there's little room for subtlety, the British being depicted as arrogant imperialists. Though the director also attributes the success of British aggression to the corruption of the Qing dynasty. Either way, these events were followed by decades of defeat and decline for China at the hands of foreigners. And the director believes his series has an important nationalist message, that China needs to be strong to avoid it happening again.
It's a historical tragedy, and we need to think about it deeply. We need to look back at this history because we need to accept our failure. We don't want it to happen again.
That sentiment's also being conveyed in the way the Opium Wars are explained to school children, who have no difficulty pointing to the chief villain of the period. Here at one of Guangzhou's oldest high schools, they're also taught about how the vile trade enfeebled China and how the return of Hong Kong to the motherland will herald a new era.
I think the Hong Kong's return can help China to get stronger and stronger.
The most important is we don't let Hong Kong leave our country. And China is Hong Kong's motherland.
Today, Guangzhou, the scene of the original crime, is a thriving city, a city that lives on trade and commerce of all kinds. It's also one of China's most open and outward-looking cities, precisely what the early traders had in mind. The city and region have become a magnet to modern-day merchants under China's open-door policy of the last 2 decades. Above the forts that try to keep foreigners out is the vast Pearl River Bridge, designed to bring them in, and to be opened on July the 1st, one of several projects to mark the handover. At the border crossing from Hong Kong, a massive hoarding promises a better future for the territory, while a giant clock counts down the days and seconds to the handover, but also to what's seen by a newly assertive China as the end of a humiliating era.